Okay, so remind me what a transversal is. A transversal. You right?
A line that fits in between points?
Yeah, a line that cuts through other stuff. So in this case, it's cutting through two other lines. How many transversals do we have here? Three. Each of them can act as a transversal. So M could be a transversal because M cuts through P and N. P and N, right? So N cuts through P and N. N can be a transversal because it cuts through M and P, vice versa, blah, 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 all of that. So when you're trying to identify the transversal, it depends on what angle pair you're talking about, right? So in number 1, which is the one we're going to review right now, in number 1, we're talking about angles 4 and 5. So when I do this, the first thing I do is I highlight my angles because then I can see, in this case, which one is our transversal. P. Why? That's the line that touches both of those angles, right? So our transversal here would be P. Is line P. So that's our transversal, which means, again, when I talk about the other two lines, I'm going to refer to them as like sandwich bread. When I talk about my two pieces of bread, what are my two pieces of bread? If P is my transversal, which two are my bread pieces? M and N, because those are the other two. So then I go through and I highlight line M and line N. I said that in the opposite order. Okay, now when I'm looking at angles 4 and 5, what am I looking at? The first thing I want to ask myself is, are they what? Inside or outside? So here's my bread. Are they in the sandwich or outside the sandwich? Inside, which means am I talking about interior or exterior? Interior. So they're definitely interior. Are they alternate interior or same side interior? Same side. Why? Because they're both on this side of the transversal. So we would call these same side interiors. All right, so we've now identified our transversal and classified our angles. That's the process I follow every single time I do it. This process is way, way easier if these two lines are parallel, which luckily everything we're doing from now on is going to be with parallel lines, okay? So this is harder because you've got 3 lines, 2 of them aren't parallel. When they're just stacked parallel lines, it's a lot easier to identify what is what. So we're going to move into just talking about parallel lines because when the lines are parallel, they make special relationships. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I'm going to call this line A. This is line B, and then this is line C. Which one is my transversal here? C. C is my transversal because that's the one that's cutting through the 2 parallel lines. So going through this like we did yesterday, name an angle that corresponds to angle A. Which angle corresponds to angle A? F. Micah, why? Same position, other set, right? So if we have our top set, which is like our A set, and we've got our bottom set, which is our B set, because those are on line A and B. A here, angle A, is in the top left. So which one's in the top left down here? Angle F. So they are corresponding. So we would say A corresponds to F. Whoops. I'm going to use a capital A because that's what I used in my picture. So A corresponds to angle F. How is A related to G? How is A related to G? Guillermo? Alternate exterior, because A is outside of the sandwich, but on a different side than G. Can I have an alternate interior to A? Can I have an alternate interior to A? No. Why not? It's exterior. I can't call it an interior angle. Okay, can somebody name a pair of same side interiors? Yoreth?
B and E.
Which one?
B and E. Angle B and E.
I agree with E.
Or angle D and E.
Good, D and E. I thought you were saying D. Yes, D and E are same side interiors because they're both inside and they're on the same side. Okay, so we said this yesterday, but I'm going to repeat it today. There are 2 different things that happen with all of these angles. They're either going to be congruent or they're going to add up to 180. Those are your only options, okay? So corresponding angles postulate says, again, this is a complicated way of saying it, if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, so if A and B are parallel and line C cuts through them, then the corresponding angles are congruent, which means A, which corresponds to F, if A is 120, then what does F have to be? Also 120. So corresponding angles are going to be congruent. This is the part you need to know. Corresponding angles are congruent. As long as these two lines are what? Parallel. Exactly. So if these two lines are parallel, then the corresponding angles are congruent. Which means that let's say A is 120, let's say B is 60. Which other one then do you know is 60 degrees? E. Why? Because those are corresponding. Exactly. So A is corresponding to F, B corresponds to E. Therefore, if A is 120, F has to be 120. Same thing with B and E. Could I figure out the other angles here? How could I figure out C? Why is C 60? Yes, it is. Why, though? How do I know C is 60? B and C are vertical angles. So these are vertical angles, which means they have to be congruent. These are also vertical angles. So if this is 120, what's D? All right, and then down here, what are these? Same thing, right? 60 and 120. So basically, if I give you one angle, how many other ones can you figure out? All of the other ones. Because if this is 120, how did I know that had to be 60? Yeah, because they make a what? Straight line, and a straight line has how many degrees? 180. So literally there's two things angles do. They either add up to 180 or they are congruent. Now, are there other things that can happen? Sure. But in geometry, if you're guessing, if you're like, I have no idea, guess one of those two things. They're either equal or they add up to 180. Those are the two things that are probably going to happen. Okay, so corresponding angles are congruent, which means in here, if this one's 80, what does X have to be? 80. Because these are corresponding. These are my parallel lines. This is in like the top right here, the top of the X. This is also in the top of the X, so those are corresponding. All right, in this figure, I want to find out QRS, which is this angle right here. So I want to figure out this one. How can I do that using what I have here? What do I know? I know this angle is 118 degrees, right? Which one does this correspond to? X, because this one's on the left and this one's on the left. So if this is 118, what does this one have to be? So then how could I figure out this one? Subtract from Y. It makes a straight line. So I'm going to do 180 minus 118. Did I do that right? 62? Okay, yes, 62. All right, so that one would have to be 62. And now that I have those, I know all my angles, right? Because if this is 118 and this is 118, if this is 62, this is 62 also, right? And if I know this is 62, what's this one? 62. And this one must be 118. And this one must be 62. And this one must be 118. So literally all you have there, all you need is in those two angles. Okay, the other relationships that we talked about yesterday were alternate interior angles, alternate exterior angles, and same side interior angles. And I said this yesterday, but I'm going to repeat it again. If the lines are parallel, corresponding angles, alternate interior, and alternate exterior are all congruent. The only one that's different is same side interior. They're supplementary, which means they do what? Yep, add up to 180. So for instance, D and E are same side interior, so they add up to 180. So you would say angle D plus angle E, that's not an E, but pretend, equals 180. What about angle E and C? What kind of angles are those? Alternate interior, which means that they are congruent. What about angle A and G? Alternate exterior, which means that they are congruent. What about angles B and E? Corresponding, because one's inside, one's outside, so it's corresponding, which means that they are congruent. The only time it's different is if they are same side interior. So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what relationship are these angles in? And that's those four things: alternate int, alt x, corresponding, or same side interior. Once you know that they are either congruent or supplementary. And the only time they're supplementary is if they are same side interior. Other than that, they're always going to be congruent. So for the most part, they will be congruent. If they aren't congruent, they're going to add up to 180. And you can kind of tell when you look at it, right? These both look like they're smaller, they're congruent, whereas this one and this one, D is what kind of angle? Acute or obtuse? Obtuse, and E is acute, so they can't be the same, so then they probably add up to 180. Again, if you don't remember that, like, oh, I know that alternate exterior angles have to be congruent. If you don't remember it, use those kind of visual cues. Does A look the same as F? Then they're probably congruent as opposed to supplementary. All right, I tell you guys all the time, like, don't assume things in geometry. Don't assume, but be logical about it, right? If something appears to be an obtuse angle and the other one appears to be acute, they're probably not the same. Okay, so I had a practice sheet. I don't think we have time to do it, and I'm not that worried about it. So what I would like you guys to do is just do your exit ticket first, and then if you have time to do the practice, that's fine. But before you do, hang on one second. For each angle measure, so the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what relationship are they? And remember, it's corresponding, alt int, and alt x are all congruent. And then same side interior are supplementary. So then, like, number one is going to be a little bit simpler. Number two, you've got expressions. So these two angles are in which of these relationships? This angle here and this angle here are corresponding. So that means that they are, which means what can you do with these two expressions? Make them equal. Very good. So if they're congruent, make them equal. If they're supplementary, add them up to 180. Good. Okay, so those three for your exit ticket, and that's it.